We are back today to talk a little bit more about EA Sports College Football 25 being a really important part of Dynasty recruiting, because you can't build if you don't recruit well. So let's go over pretty much everything there is that we have been told up to this point. So starting with the basics. First off, we have a lot of recruits that we'll be able to try to recruit. 4,000 prospects, including athletes who are back in the game, but because of that, we will not be able to create new prospects. And as for how recruiting is going to work, kind of harping back to pre-NCAA 14, where we're going to have a certain number of hours to commit each week to scouting and recruiting to hopefully sign up to 35 players. Now that kind of sounded like what we used to have prior to NCAA 14, like in 13 here, where we had 10 hours of which we can call for actual recruiting purposes, 3 hours for scouting. And in those calls, you could have it be 10 to 60 minutes. Every 10 minutes, unlocked a topic we could talk about that is listed here. Conference prestige was the most important here for John Hampton. So we would talk about that, and with that, we would gain points to help us move up their board. And building off of what we talked about in our previous College Football 25 video where we discussed the custom conferences, deal breakers have been added, or maybe I would say even more so improved from that previous NCAA 14, where there are certain things players are looking for. If you do not meet them, you are locked out. If you have not been locked out, well then some guys may not think you're meeting quite so their criteria, but to overcome that, you could send the house, meaning you're throwing a lot of hours at the prospect to try to improve of what you are better at. But similarly to past games, definitely NCAA 14, if you cannot stay above the recruit's cut line, well then you still might find yourself locked out. And building off of that point, this is where we're gonna have the NIL step into place. Now there is not any real NIL. We're not able to offer money, and that essentially comes to the fact where there's just an ever-changing landscape. So to kind of counteract that, what EA has done is essentially make something that's was in the game, improve it a little bit so that way it still fits in the rules, as there is no pay for play in the NCAA. So instead, what we have is brand exposure, and that is taking over TV exposure. Now this part, nothing new, and I expect we're gonna have something very similar to this. Again, this screenshot here taken from NCAA 13, where your school had essentially its own ratings. Things you were good at, things you weren't good at, and you could use these to try to influence players. Television exposure, again, that will be taken over as brand exposure. And with that, you'll be able to try to influence some recruits in coming to your school. And that means that you can't park Lamborghinis outside your facility like some teams are kind of doing for their brand exposure. Now continuing on in ways to try to help keep yourself above that cut line for your prospects, well, visits will play a key role. As states here, recruiting visits can be fashioned specific to what a player wants. As an example, they say playing time, a big motivation for a lot of players. So what you could do is have this player come into a position meeting, right? But if you have invited multiple quarterbacks during that same week, well, then that might actually do the opposite of helping you. It might actually make them decide to go with a different school as they don't want that competition. And additionally, back in NCAA 14, we used to schedule all our visits against the worst possible teams. That way we could beat up on them, and the recruits liked it because we racked up yardage or touchdowns, or whatever the defense was looking for. It's not going to work the same here in College Football 25. A win against a bad opponent won't help you as much, and a loss could very much hurt your standings. A win against a good team, though, will very much help. As an example here, again, going back to NCAA 14, where you would be able to schedule up to 5 visits in 1 week. But you could see here that there were complimentary as well as some competitive visits. Again, with that example, having multiple quarterbacks show up, that's not going to help out if they are looking for early playing time. If they are not, and they're just more focused on that brand exposure or conference prestige, then it might not negatively affect you. And lastly, when it comes to just the basic part of recruiting, of course, matching real life, the transfer portal is included in this game. It is not going to work exactly like free agency. The transfer portal is going to be woven into the traditional recruiting process, very similar to how JUCOs were in the NCAA games. However, this is not going to be open all year round. There is not going to be any sort of tampering. And we all know that's starting to become a little bit of a problem in the transfer portal era. So good thing on EA to not include any way for us to do that. But when it does arrive, you will have to split your hours between your traditional high school recruits. I'm assuming JUCOs will still be in the game, though they might just be labeled under the normal transfers, of which these transfers will have a star rating, and the recruiting process works very similar to what it is for their high school counterpart. And a fun thing that they added is a few years into your dynasty, when a new computer player goes into the portal, they will remember if you recruited them out of high school, and that might either help or hinder your ability to get them later on. Now, luckily, the recruiting process is not all going to be based off of your own school ratings, like the brand exposure we talked about earlier. You could help yourself with your coaches. Building off of what they had in NCAA 14, the coaching trees will be back, but they're going to be far more improved. You could either go down the motivator, recruiter, or tactician skill tree, and these skill trees will not be able to be entirely filled out throughout your time in Dynasty, as we are limited to just those 30 years. Additionally, your coordinators, which you can now hire and fire, may also affect your ability to recruit, which also means you could try to poach good coaches from other schools to improve your own. Now, the coaching tree is really nothing new. We had it in NCAA 14, and how exactly we get the abilities to upgrade our coaches, that information has not quite gone out. Imagine just as we had in NCAA 14, there's going to be coaching XP that we could use to then unlock these trees, though as mentioned, you will not be able to unlock everything. So make sure you're building your coach well. And for the final part here, it's not all really coming down to straight recruiting. It's about building your team for the future, and there's a couple things that have been added to help you manage that. First off, there is a new rule from real life being added, the Redshirt Rule. You'll be allowed to play 4 games while still being able to maintain that red shirt. So you have to keep an eye on that. If you go over those 4 games, well then no longer is your player eligible for that red shirt and you burn a year. Building off of that, there will be no 6th or 7th year seniors. You only have 5 years of eligibility, so no COVID years or any of that happening here in College Football 25. It is strictly your redshirt year, and then freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. No medical redshirts. And keeping that management forefront is going to be important, because we are going to have even more players wanting to leave your school in College Football 25, whether it's to go to the NFL or to transfer. Now, as kind of the trend has been, again, this is nothing new. We've had it in the past, going back to NCAA 14. You had players wanting to go to the draft, to transfer for whatever their reasons were, or to even declare early. But that is going to be ramped up, and it may not be as easy as it was back then to try to convince players to stick around. But good news if you're planning on using any of these service academies, unlike in real life, you will still be able to take in transfers. So you will have access to the transfer portal. And of course, with all these positives, there has to be at least one negative to take from recruiting. And for those that also like to play Madden alongside, you will not have the option to export any of your classes into Madden 25 or any of those coming thereafter. And this is coming down to the fact that EA only has a player's license for their college likeness, not their NFL likeness. And this will remain the case even after all of the real players have been filtered out of your dynasty. So that means all computer-generated classes will not be eligible either. However, if you're a Road to Glory fan, you will be able to export that player into Madden Superstar mode. So we have a lot of information on what the current process is going to be for recruiting heading into College Football 25. It seems like they've gone back from NCAA 14 to go into that 12-13 where you're spending a little bit more time actually getting to know and pitching your school rather than in NCAA 14 where you just threw some points at them and honestly forgot about them until you recruited them. That probably means also that the low lock cheese might be out of the game. They're wanting to make things more difficult and a little bit more realistic, and I think we're touching on a lot of good things. We'll probably get some more information, actually see what these things look like and how we get to interact with them hopefully soon. Again, the game less than a month away. Interested to hear what you guys think about the recruiting, if you like it, if you preferred NCAA 14, if you're kind of disappointing in the lack of true NIL, again, just going with that brand exposure. I understand from their standpoint that it changes so much. You can't offer Lamborghinis here in EA Sports. Maybe having some money to throw in there? We'll see how that gets sorted in the future installments, but I think it's a nice way to kind of get us back into the flow. Excited to see how it turns out and very excited to get my hands on it. I have an idea for my first Dynasty on maybe a certain rule of certain types of players or ratings that players have to have to just make the thing a little bit more difficult for us, kind of match in with the relegation that we're doing with our realignment as well. If you're not sure what I'm talking about there, again, going back to that custom conferences video we had on Monday. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Again, let me know what you think about these recruiting systems that we're going to be getting into in College Football 25, and we'll see you guys next time as we will go over one more bit of information here on College Football 25 before we get back to the normal content. We'll still touch on some subjects as we go along. Really excited for College Football 25. Make sure you stick around to watch that first Dynasty and probably a little bit of some Road to Glory mixed in there as well by hitting that bear icon on the bottom right or scrolling down, hit the sub button, and definitely tap that bell icon as well so you are notified. But until next time, where we'll have more news on EA Sports College Football 25, we will see you then.